The Grand Assembly Hall of the Galactic Alliance sprawled across the upper levels of Nexus Station, a marvel of interspecies architecture that had taken nearly 3 centuries to complete. Environmental chambers lined the walls, each tailored to the specific atmospheric needs of member species, while the Central Forum maintained a carefully calibrated neutral atmosphere where most delegates could function comfortably, if not always optimally. Ambassador Eleanor Wright adjusted her formal diplomatic attire, a blend of traditional human garb with subtle nods to galactic fashion sensibilities, and glanced down at Riel. The Belgian Malinois sat perfectly poised beside her, his enhanced cognition evident in the alert intelligence of his amber eyes. Riel's ceremonial vest displayed Earth's insignia alongside the specialized translator module that hung from his collar, a device that had been the subject of much derision among certain Alliance factions. "Ready, old friend?" Eleanor whispered, her fingers briefly brushing the top of Riel's head. Riel's ears perked forward, a slight wag of his tail the only response needed between them. Their partnership had begun long before either had been assigned to diplomatic service, back when Eleanor was still navigating the complexities of international relations on Earth. Now, 2 decades after humanity's admission into the Galactic Alliance, they represented their species in a forum where humans were still considered primitive newcomers. The Interspecies Grand Summit was the Alliance's most prestigious diplomatic gathering, held once every 5 standard years. This marked only the 4th such summit that humans had been permitted to attend, and Eleanor was acutely aware of the scrutiny they faced. The inclusion of Riel had been controversial from the start. Many species viewed the companionship between humans and lower animals as primitive at best, disturbing at worst. "Ambassador Wright," a melodious voice called from behind. Eleanor turned to find Delegate Luminara approaching, her luminescent skin casting a soft blue glow in the dimmed corridor lighting. The Meridian representative had been one of humanity's earliest allies in the Alliance. "Delegate Luminara, a pleasure as always," Eleanor said, inclining her head in the traditional Meridian greeting. "And to you," Luminara replied, her eyes shifting to Riel. "I see your diplomatic companion accompanies you again. How marvelous." "The Earth delegation wouldn't be complete without him," Eleanor said with a smile. "His observational skills have proven invaluable in previous negotiations." Luminara's expression became serious, her bioluminescent patterns shifting to a pattern that Eleanor had learned to recognize as concern. "I should warn you. There's been talk among certain factions. The Vularians in particular have been quite vocal about their objections to Riel's presence." Eleanor's smile didn't falter, though her eyes hardened slightly. "Thank you for the warning, though it's hardly unexpected. We've faced similar objections at every summit since our admission." "Yes, but Sub-Ambassador Tri has been particularly adamant this cycle. He's been gathering support from the Traditionalist bloc." "Let him try," Eleanor said with diplomatic calm. "Riel's presence is protected under Article 47B of the Admission Treaty, unless they wish to challenge our membership entirely. They have no grounds." Luminara's patterns flickered in what Eleanor recognized as the Meridian equivalent of a sigh. "Just be careful, Ambassador. The Vularians are not known for their subtlety or restraint." "Neither are we humans, when pushed," Eleanor replied, her tone light but her meaning clear. "But I appreciate your concern. Delegate, shall we proceed to the chamber?" The grand doors to the assembly hall parted before them, revealing a spectacular panorama of interstellar diplomacy in action. Hundreds of species were represented, from the gaseous nebulans drifting in specialized containment fields to the crystalline syntherians, whose bodies refracted light in hypnotic patterns. Eleanor recognized representatives from at least 60 worlds, with dozens more she couldn't immediately identify. High Patriarch Zilx, the venerable Arcturian who had chaired the Alliance Council for over 3 centuries, stood at the central podium, his ancient body, supported by an exoskeleton of living metal, turned slightly as Eleanor and Riel entered, and he acknowledged them with the slightest inclination of his elaborately adorned head. "The delegation from Earth arrives," announced the automated protocol system, its voice resonating through the chamber in the common galactic language. "Ambassador Eleanor Wright and diplomatic companion Riel." A murmur rippled through the assembly. While most delegates maintained the composed indifference expected of seasoned diplomats, Eleanor noted several reactions of interest. The Keldorian representatives clicked their mandibles in what she knew to be amusement, while a cluster of Vega Prime delegates hurriedly closed their outer eyelids, a sign of disapproval in their culture. Most telling was the reaction from the Vularian delegation. Sub-Ambassador Tri, his scaled form, draped in the complex ceremonial harness of his position, visibly stiffened. The chromatic scales along his neck ridge flared crimson, a clear sign of agitation that his diplomatic training should have controlled. Eleanor proceeded down the central aisle with measured dignity, Riel maintaining perfect position at her side. They had rehearsed this entrance countless times, knowing the psychological importance of first impressions, particularly among species who still questioned humanity's readiness for galactic society. Ambassador Wright, High Patriarch Zilks, greeted her formally as she reached the Earth delegation's designated position. "We welcome Earth's voice to this summit." "High Patriarch," Eleanor responded with the precise bow required by Arcturian custom, 45 degrees, held for 3 seconds, no eye contact until the rise. "Earth is honored to participate in the continued prosperity of our shared alliance." Eleanor took her seat, with Riel settling at her feet in a position that allowed him clear sightlines across the chamber. The dog's enhanced cognitive functions, the result of generations of careful breeding and genetic refinement rather than crude manipulation, made him an exceptional observer. Riel could detect subtle physiological changes in most oxygen-breathing species, recognizing signs of deception or aggression that even the most sophisticated scanners sometimes missed. The High Patriarch was proceeding through the opening formalities when the disruption occurred. Sub-Ambassador Tri rose from his seat without recognition, a breach of protocol that immediately silenced the chamber. "High Patriarch!" The Vularian's voice carried the sibilant overtones characteristic of his species. "I must formally object to the continued mockery of these proceedings." Zilks turned his ancient eyes toward the Vularian. "Clarify your objection, Sub-Ambassador." Tri's neck scales rippled with color. "The Earth delegation continues to bring a subservient animal into these hallowed chambers. It degrades the dignity of this assembly and insults the intelligence of all present." Eleanor maintained her composure, though she noted Riel's ears had shifted slightly backward, the only indication of his awareness of being discussed. "The presence of diplomatic companion Riel has been previously addressed and resolved," Zilks stated, his tone carrying the weight of centuries of authority. "Earth's admission treaty specifically provides for their unique diplomatic practices." "A mistake that requires correction," Tri pressed, his tail lashing once against the floor, a serious breach of Vularian self-control. "The creature has no place in interstellar diplomacy. It is an insult to place a primitive animal alongside evolved sentience." Eleanor caught the subtle shift in the chamber's atmosphere. While many delegates clearly disapproved of Tri's outburst, she noted at least a third of the assembly seemed to agree with his sentiment. The Vularian wasn't alone in his disdain. "The objection is noted but overruled," Zilks declared. "We shall proceed with—" "I have not finished," Tri interrupted. Another shocking breach of protocol that caused several delegates to emit various sounds of surprise. The Vularian stepped from behind his delegation's seating area and moved into the central aisle, directly toward the Earth delegation. Eleanor tensed but remained seated, her expression neutral as Tri approached. Riel, however, rose smoothly to his feet, positioning himself between the advancing Vularian and his human partner. "This is what Earth brings to our alliance," Tree announced loudly, gesturing at Riel with a contemptuous sweep of his scaled hand. A beast that follows commands. A pet that sits at their feet. And they expect us to consider them equals? Sub-Ambassador, Eleanor said calmly, finally breaking her silence. Your objection has been noted and addressed by the High Patriarch. I suggest you return to your delegation before you create a diplomatic incident that your government will regret. Tree's scales flashed a deep purple, a color Eleanor recognized as indicating extreme agitation in Valerians. The assembly had gone completely silent, every delegate watching the confrontation with rapt attention. You presume to lecture me on diplomacy? Tree hissed. You, whose species was burning fossil fuels while mine was establishing colonies across 12 systems? The calculated insult hung in the air. Eleanor maintained her diplomatic smile, though anyone familiar with human expressions would have noticed it had lost all warmth. Historical timelines are irrelevant to current diplomatic standing, she replied evenly. Perhaps we could discuss your concerns in a more appropriate forum after the summit's opening ceremonies. There is no appropriate forum for discussing the presence of animals in diplomatic proceedings. Tree spat, now standing only 2 meters from where Riel maintained his protective stance. The creature should be removed immediately. Eleanor noted the shifting attention of the delegates. This confrontation was rapidly becoming the defining moment of the summit's opening, exactly what she had hoped to avoid. Yet she also recognized the opportunity it presented. How humanity responded to this challenge would be carefully analyzed by every species present. Sub-Ambassador Try, she said, her voice carrying clearly through the chamber without raising its volume. Diplomatic Companion Riel is officially recognized by the Alliance Charter under Article 47b, subsection 12, regarding species-specific diplomatic practices. His presence is not subject to unilateral objection. Articles and subsections, Try scoffed. Paper shields for primitive practices. What happened next occurred so quickly that many delegates would later debate the precise sequence of events. Try moved forward, with the apparent intention of returning to his delegation. But as he passed Riel, his scaled foot lashed out in a deliberate kick that connected solidly with the dog's ribs. A collective gasp echoed through the chamber. Physical contact of any kind, let alone an aggressive act, was strictly forbidden in Alliance diplomatic proceedings. The violation was unprecedented in recent memory. Riel absorbed the impact without a sound, maintaining his position while fixing Try with an unnervingly intelligent gaze. Eleanor rose from her seat in a single fluid motion, her expression transformed from diplomatic neutrality to cold fury. High Patriarch, she said, her voice cutting through the shocked silence. I formally request that the record show Sub-Ambassador Try of Vularia has committed a Category 3 violation of diplomatic protocol through unprovoked physical aggression against an official member of the Earth delegation. Try's scales had settled into a smugly triumphant orange hue. I merely removed an obstacle from my path. If the humans insist on bringing animals into our chambers, they cannot expect the dignities afforded to true diplomatic representatives. Zilks raised a gnarled hand, the living metal of his exoskeleton gleaming under the chamber lights. This disruption is unprecedented and unacceptable. Sub-Ambassador Try, you will return to your delegation immediately. The Council will convene after this session to address this violation. Try made a gesture that translated roughly as dismissive acknowledgement in Valerian body language. But he did not move immediately to return to his seat. Instead, he looked down at Riel with obvious contempt. Not even a whimper, he observed. At least the creature is well trained. Eleanor stepped forward, placing herself beside Riel. When she spoke, her voice had taken on a quality that caused several nearby delegates to shift uncomfortably in their seats. Sub-Ambassador, she said quietly, though her words carried in the silent chamber. You seem to be operating under a significant misapprehension regarding diplomatic companion Riel. Oh? Tree's neck scales rippled with amusement. And what would that be, Ambassador? Rael is not here as a pet or status symbol, Eleanor explained with deadly calm. He is a fully accredited member of Earth's diplomatic corps, with specialized training and enhanced cognitive abilities that your briefings have clearly failed to adequately explain. Try made a sound that his translator rendered as derisive laughter. Enhanced cognitive abilities? You expect us to believe your domesticated animal understands galactic diplomacy? Eleanor smiled then, a smile that several of the older delegates would later compare to the expression of a Cassiopeian apex predator. I don't expect you to believe anything, Sub-Ambassador. I'm merely informing you that your action constitutes an assault on a diplomatic representative, with all the consequences that entails. Consequences. Tree's scales flickered between orange confidence and a momentary flash of uncertain yellow. What consequences could possibly arise from disciplining an animal? Eleanor glanced down at Riel, who had maintained his perfect composure throughout the confrontation. The dog's intelligent eyes met hers briefly, and something unspoken passed between them. Article 47B doesn't merely permit Riel's presence, Eleanor explained, returning her gaze to Try. It recognizes his status and rights. The same article that protects him from exclusion also grants him the right of proportional response to diplomatic aggression. A murmur spread through the chamber as delegates quickly accessed the relevant treaty sections through their neural interfaces or assistants. Try's scales shifted more rapidly now, uncertainty becoming more prominent. You cannot possibly mean, he began. I mean precisely that, Eleanor interrupted smoothly. You have assaulted a diplomatic representative of Earth. Under Alliance law, he is entitled to respond in kind. This is absurd, Try hissed, his tail lashing again in agitation. You would use an archaic provision to justify animal aggression in these chambers? High Patriarch Zilks intervened, his ancient voice cutting through the rising tension. Ambassador Wright is correct in her interpretation of the law. Article 47B was specifically negotiated during Earth's admission to accommodate their unique relationship with companion species. It includes the standard diplomatic protection clauses, including the right of proportional response. Are you suggesting, Try demanded incredulously, that this creature could attack me with impunity? Not with impunity, Eleanor corrected. With legal justification, within proportional limits, just as any diplomat who had been physically assaulted would be entitled to defend themselves. The assembly had erupted into a buzz of conversation, delegates conferring urgently with their advisors. Many were clearly fascinated by this unexpected application of a treaty provision that most had considered a mere cultural accommodation. However, Eleanor continued, I can assure you that Riel has no intention of responding physically to your provocation. Try's scales settled somewhat, the orange of confidence returning. At least you maintain some semblance of civilization. You misunderstand me, Sub-Ambassador, Eleanor said. I didn't say he wouldn't respond. I said he wouldn't respond physically. Before Try could reply, Eleanor turned to Riel and spoke a single word in a language that the translation systems didn't process, a command in an old Earth language specifically chosen for its obscurity in galactic circles. Vindicate! Riel's ears perked forward, his intelligent eyes focused on Try with an intensity that caused the Vularian to take an involuntary step backward. Then, to the astonishment of the assembly, the dog turned away from Try and walked calmly to the nearest environmental control terminal embedded in the floor near the Earth delegation's position. What happened next would be analyzed and debated in diplomatic academies across the Alliance for decades. Riel positioned himself before the terminal, and a series of precise barks and growls emerged from his translator module, not in the common galactic language, but in the distinct patterns of system interface code. The terminal responded with a soft chime of acknowledgement. What is happening? Try demanded, his scales now flashing between alarmed crimson and confused yellow. What is the animal doing? Eleanor maintained her diplomatic smile. Riel is exercising his right of proportional response. Sub-ambassador. Nothing more. Across the chamber, environmental monitors began to register subtle changes. Most delegates were unaware of any difference until the specialized atmospheric chamber, designated for the Vularian delegation, began to recalibrate. The adjustment was minor but precise. A 2% increase in nitrogen levels, coupled with a fractional decrease in ambient temperature. For most species, such changes would be imperceptible. For Vularians, whose respiratory systems and thermal regulation were exquisitely sensitive, the effect was immediate and pronounced. Try's scales flushed a sickly grayish-green as his breathing became visibly labored. This is outrageous!" he gasped, struggling to maintain his dignity as his body responded to the environmental shift. "You're attacking our entire delegation!" "Not at all," Eleanor replied calmly. "The atmospheric adjustments are well within safety parameters for Vularian physiology. Riel has simply recalibrated your chamber to the precise specifications of Vularian mountain regions, rather than your preferred lowland settings. Uncomfortable, certainly, but entirely non-harmful, much like a kick to the ribs." The Vularian delegation had begun to exhibit similar signs of discomfort, several members rising from their seats in confusion. Unlike more dramatic diplomatic incidents involving weapons or threats, this response was subtle, technical, and devastatingly effective. "Restore our atmospheric settings immediately," Tri demanded, his once imperious voice now strained. "The adjustment is temporary," Eleanor informed him. "Exactly 17 minutes in duration, 1 minute for each year that Riel has served in Earth's diplomatic corps. At that point, your chamber will automatically return to its standard settings." High Patriarch Zilx, who had been observing the situation with the impassive patience of his long-lived species, finally spoke. "Sub-Ambassador Tri, I suggest you and your delegation temporarily relocate to the auxiliary chambers until your primary chamber recalibrates. We shall proceed with the summit agenda in your absence." The humiliation was complete. The Vularian delegation would be forced to leave the opening ceremony, the most prestigious portion of the summit, due to their representatives' impulsive action. The political consequences within alliance politics were obvious to everyone present. Tri's scales had settled into the dull gray of defeat and shame, though a dangerous undertone of deep crimson suggested his anger remained undiminished. As attendants moved to escort the Vularian delegation to their temporary quarters, Tri paused beside Eleanor. "This insult will not be forgotten, Ambassador," he hissed quietly. Eleanor met his gaze with perfect composure. "Neither will your assault on a diplomatic representative of Earth, Sub-Ambassador. I would suggest you consider carefully whether this is a path your government wishes to pursue further." As the Vularians departed, Eleanor returned to her seat with Riel, resuming his position at her feet. She noted with interest how the regard of many delegates had subtly shifted. What had been condescension or amusement in many eyes had transformed into something closer to cautious respect. Delegate Luminara leaned toward her slightly. "Impressive," the Meridian whispered, her skin patterns reflecting admiration. "I had no idea your companion possessed such specific talents." "Riel has many capabilities that don't appear in his official profile," Eleanor replied softly. "We find it advantageous to maintain certain ambiguities." Clearly, Luminara's patterns shifted to a complex configuration that indicated both amusement and new appreciation. The rumors about Earth's enhanced canines have apparently understated rather than exaggerated their abilities. "A common misconception," Eleanor agreed with a small smile, reaching down to briefly touch Riel's head. The dog leaned slightly into her hand, the only acknowledgement between them of what had just transpired, as High Patriarch Zilx called the summit back to order. Eleanor observed the subtle shifts in the chamber's dynamics. Delegates, who had previously ignored the Earth representatives, were now watching them with renewed interest. Species that had dismissed humans as primitive newcomers were reassessing their assumptions. In the complex game of galactic politics, perception was often as important as reality. The legend of Earth's diplomatic dogs had just taken a significant leap forward. The remainder of the summit's opening proceeded without incident, though the empty Vularian section stood as a pointed reminder of the morning's confrontation. When the session adjourned for the customary refreshment interval, Eleanor found herself approached by an unprecedented number of delegates, many of whom had previously avoided direct interaction with the human contingent. Ambassador Wright, the imposing representative of the Draconian conclave, addressed her, his scaled form towering nearly 3 meters tall. "I find myself curious about your species' relationship with these enhanced companions. A relationship built on mutual respect and shared purpose. Primarch Vorex," Eleanor replied. "One that predates our spacefaring capabilities by thousands of years." "Fascinating," the Draconian rumbled, his multifaceted eyes studying Riel with new interest. "In some ways, it reminds me of our ancestral bond with the Crate Navigators, though they were never brought into diplomatic circles. Different species, different solutions," Eleanor offered diplomatically. "Earth has always valued the unique perspectives that different cognitive approaches can offer." As the Draconian moved away, Luminara approached again, her luminescence now patterned in what Eleanor recognized as urgency. "Ambassador, a moment of your time?" Eleanor nodded, following the meridian to a quieter alcove away from the main gathering. Riel padded silently alongside them, his alert gaze continuously monitoring the surrounding delegates. "What I'm about to tell you is not official information," Luminara began, her voice lowered. "But my sources in the Council Secretariat indicate that Sub-Ambassador Tri has filed a formal protest demanding sanctions against Earth for what he terms technological assault." Eleanor's expression remained neutral. "An interesting characterization of events, considering his physical assault was witnessed by the entire assembly. The Vularians are claiming that your companion's interface with the environmental systems constitutes illegal technological intrusion," Luminara continued. "They're arguing that allowing an enhanced animal access to Alliance systems poses a security risk. Article 47B explicitly permits the use of species-specific abilities in diplomatic functions." Eleanor countered smoothly. "Riel's interface capabilities were fully documented in Earth's admission protocols." "Yes, but many assume those capabilities were theoretical rather than practical." Luminara's patterns shifted to what Eleanor had learned to recognize as the meridian equivalent of a wry smile. "The demonstration today has caused considerable reassessment." "That was inevitable," Eleanor remarked. "Sooner or later, the Alliance would need to confront its preconceptions about Earth and our approach to interspecies cooperation. Nevertheless, be prepared for formal proceedings," Luminara warned. "The Traditionalist Bloc sees this as an opportunity to challenge the accommodations granted in your admission treaty." "We're prepared for any challenge," Eleanor assured her, glancing down at Riel, who sat attentively at her side. Earth didn't navigate the complexities of Alliance admission without developing contingencies. After Luminara departed, Eleanor took a moment to assess the diplomatic landscape that had so dramatically shifted in the span of a single morning. What had begun as a deliberate provocation by the Vularians had transformed into an unexpected opportunity to demonstrate the unique capabilities that Earth brought to the Alliance. "Well played, old friend," she murmured to Riel, who acknowledged the praise with a slight wag of his tail. "Though I suspect we've only seen the opening moves of this particular game." As they prepared to return to the assembly hall for the afternoon session, Eleanor was approached by an aide to High Patriarch Zilx, a diminutive Arcturian whose exoskeleton bore the markings of the Patriarch's personal household. "Ambassador Wright," the aide addressed her with formal precision. The High Patriarch requests your presence in his private chamber immediately following today's proceedings. Of course, Eleanor responded with the appropriate bow. Will this be a formal consultation? The Patriarch did not specify. The aide replied. However, he specifically requested that diplomatic companion Riel accompany you. As the aide departed, Eleanor exchanged a meaningful glance with Riel. A private audience with the High Patriarch was rare enough. The explicit inclusion of Riel suggested that the morning's events had captured the ancient Arcturian's interest in unexpected ways. It seems we've made quite an impression, she murmured. The afternoon session proceeded with notable differences in the chamber's atmosphere. The Vularian delegation had returned, though they had been relocated to an alternate seating arrangement farther from the central podium, a subtle but unmistakable diplomatic slight. Sub-Ambassador Tri was conspicuously absent, replaced by a junior representative whose scales remained carefully neutral in coloration throughout the proceedings. More telling were the changed dynamics surrounding the Earth delegation. Where previously there had been a subtle isolation, delegates maintaining polite but minimum interaction, now there was a constant stream of communication directed toward Eleanor. Questions about Earth's enhanced companion program, inquiries about the specific training methodologies, and diplomatic overtures that had been pending for months suddenly received urgent priority. When the session finally adjourned, Eleanor and Riel were escorted through a series of restricted corridors to the private chambers of High Patriarch Zilx. Unlike the grand public spaces of the Alliance headquarters, these areas reflected the ancient Arcturian's personal aesthetic, living architecture that seemed to pulse with subtle energy, illuminated by bioluminescent organisms that responded to the presence of visitors. The High Patriarch awaited them in a circular chamber, whose walls displayed shifting panoramas of worlds across the Alliance. His ancient form, supported by the living metal exoskeleton that had sustained him through centuries of leadership, seemed almost fragile in the private setting. Ambassador Wright, he greeted her, his voice carrying the weight of millennia of Arcturian wisdom. And diplomatic companion Riel, thank you for accepting my invitation. Eleanor performed the formal greeting with perfect precision. The honor is ours, High Patriarch. Zilx gestured toward a seating arrangement that thoughtfully included a cushioned platform at the perfect height for Riel. Please, be comfortable. This is not a formal consultation. Once they were seated, the ancient Arcturian studied them both with eyes that had witnessed the rise and fall of civilizations across the galaxy. An interesting demonstration today, he finally said, his tone giving no indication of approval or disapproval. An unfortunate necessity, Eleanor replied carefully. We would have preferred a less public clarification of Riel's status. Yes, I imagine so, Zilx agreed, the living metal of his exoskeleton shifting slightly as he adjusted his position. Though the timing may prove fortuitous, Eleanor raised an eyebrow slightly, a human expression that she knew the well-traveled patriarch would understand. Fortuitous in what way, if I may ask? Zilx gestured, and the panoramic walls shifted to display a star system that Eleanor recognized immediately. Sol, with Earth prominently featured. Your world's admission to the Alliance was not without controversy, the patriarch observed. Many believed, some still believe, that your species requires more development before full integration. A perspective we're well aware of, Eleanor acknowledged. What fewer understand, Zilx continued, is that my support for Earth's admission was based less on your current technological achievements and more on certain, unique perspectives your species brings to our collective. Riel had been sitting attentively, his intelligent gaze fixed on the ancient Arcturian. Now, to Eleanor's surprise, Zilx addressed the dog directly. Your demonstration today illustrated precisely the quality I had hoped to see, he said, speaking to Riel as naturally as he would to any diplomat. Not the technical capability, impressive though that was, but the restraint and precision with which it was applied. Riel's ears perked forward, his head tilting slightly in acknowledgement of being addressed. The Alliance faces challenges that conventional approaches have failed to resolve, Zilks continued, returning his attention to Eleanor. Border disputes with the Varaxian Expanse, resource conflicts in the Cygnus Arm, the ongoing negotiation with the machine intelligences of Tau Ceti. Traditional diplomatic frameworks have reached their limits. "And you believe Earth might offer alternative approaches?" Eleanor inquired. "I know you will," Zilks stated, with the certainty of his ancient perspective. "Your species' relationship with your companion animals represents something unique in our experience. A cross-species partnership that transcends simple utility or dominance." The Patriarch gestured again, and the walls displayed historical images from Earth, humans, and dogs working together across millennia, from ancient hunting partnerships to modern service animals, military units, and search and rescue teams. Most spacefaring species either subjugate other intelligent life forms on their worlds or evolve in isolation, Zilks observed. Humans developed a third path, genuine partnership with another species, elevating their cognitive capabilities while respecting their essential nature. Eleanor nodded slowly. "It's fundamental to our understanding of ourselves. We've never been truly alone as a species." "Precisely," Zilks agreed. "And now you've demonstrated that this partnership extends to your diplomatic approach as well. Sub-Ambassador Tri's assault could have escalated into a serious diplomatic incident. Instead, diplomatic companion Riel's response was measured, proportional, and ultimately educational for many who witnessed it." The ancient Arcturian leaned forward slightly, his exoskeleton adjusting to support the movement. "I have served as High Patriarch for over 3 centuries, Ambassador Wright. I have witnessed the admission of 17 new species to our alliance. None have generated quite the reconsideration that Earth has provoked in so short a time." "I'm not entirely sure if that's a compliment, High Patriarch," Eleanor replied with diplomatic caution. For the first time, a sound that might have been laughter emerged from the Arcturian. "It is neither compliment nor criticism, Ambassador, merely observation. Change is neither good nor bad intrinsically, but it is inevitable." Zilks gestured once more, and the walls returned to their previous display of Alliance worlds. "The formal complaint filed by the Vularian delegation will be dismissed. Their provocative action was witnessed by the entire Assembly, and your response was within the parameters established by treaty." "Thank you, High Patriarch." "Do not thank me for following established protocol," Zilks replied. "However, you should be aware that today's events have accelerated certain discussions among the Council's inner circle." Eleanor maintained her diplomatic composure, though her interest was certainly piqued. "What kind of discussions, if I may ask?" "Discussions regarding Earth's potential role in upcoming negotiations with the Varaxian Expanse," Zilks revealed. "Their representatives have specifically requested neutral mediators for the border dispute resolution. After today's demonstration, several Council members have suggested that Earth's unique approach to interspecies diplomacy might prove effective where traditional methods have failed." The implications were enormous. The Varaxian dispute had dragged on for decades, with trillions of credits and dozens of contested worlds hanging in the balance. For Earth to be considered as mediators, barely 2 decades after admission to the Alliance, was unprecedented. "That would be a significant responsibility," Eleanor acknowledged carefully. "Indeed," Zilks agreed. "And not one offered lightly. However, the incident today demonstrated something many had questioned: your species' ability to respond to provocation with measured precision rather than emotional reaction." The ancient Arcturian's gaze shifted to Riel. "And the capabilities of your diplomatic companions appear to be considerably more developed than many had assumed." Eleanor glanced at Riel, who maintained his attentive posture while offering no reaction to being discussed. "We've found that underestimation can be a useful tool in diplomacy. High Patriarch, A lesson the Vularians have now learned firsthand, Zilks observed, the living metal of his exoskeleton shifting in what Eleanor had come to recognize as amusement. Though I suspect Sub-Ambassador Tri's career may have suffered a permanent setback as a result. An unfortunate consequence of his choices, Eleanor replied diplomatically. Indeed. The High Patriarch straightened, signaling that their private conversation was nearing its conclusion. The formal invitation to join the Varaxian mediation team will be extended tomorrow during the plenary session. I suggest your delegation prepare accordingly. We are honored by the Council's confidence, Eleanor said, rising and offering the formal departure bow. As they were escorted back to the Earth delegation's quarters, Eleanor maintained her diplomatic composure, though her mind was racing with the implications of what had just transpired. What had begun as a deliberate provocation had transformed into a pivotal opportunity for humanity's standing within the Alliance. Once they were alone in the secure confines of the Earth diplomatic suite, Eleanor finally allowed herself a moment of unprofessional celebration, kneeling down to Riel's level and wrapping her arms around the dog's powerful neck. "Brilliant performance, partner," she murmured against his fur. "Absolutely brilliant." Riel leaned into the embrace, his tail wagging with genuine pleasure at the rare display of physical affection during a diplomatic mission. When Eleanor finally released him, the dog moved to a nearby console and interfaced directly through his translator module. A series of text appeared on the screen, another capability that had been carefully understated in official documentation. Environmental system access was trivial. Their security protocols require significant updating. Eleanor smiled at the observation. Let's keep that assessment to ourselves for now. I think we've given the Alliance quite enough to reconsider for one day. She moved to the suite's communication terminal, knowing that a full report to Earth's diplomatic headquarters was now urgently required. The implications of their inclusion in the Varaxian negotiations would require careful preparation and strategic planning. As she began dictating her report, Eleanor glanced at Riel, who had settled into his customary alert rest position near the door. 20 years ago, when humanity had first approached the Galactic Alliance, they had been dismissed as primitive newcomers with little to offer the interstellar community. The specialized breeding and training programs that had produced companions like Riel had been viewed as quaint curiosities at best, barbaric manipulation of lesser species at worst. Now, a single demonstration of the true capabilities of Earth's diplomatic companions had forced a fundamental reassessment. The bond between humans and dogs, a partnership that had begun around ancient fires, tens of thousands of years before humanity reached for the stars, was proving to be one of their most valuable contributions to galactic society. The traditional diplomatic reception begins in 2 hours, Eleanor told Riel as she completed her report. Given today's events, I suspect we'll be the center of considerable attention. Riel's ears perked forward, his intelligent eyes conveying understanding. After a moment, he returned to the console and interfaced again. Should I prepare additional system interface demonstrations? Eleanor laughed softly. I think one diplomatic incident per day is sufficient. Let's allow the rumors to grow naturally. Imagination can be more effective than demonstration in diplomatic circles. The reception that evening proved her prediction accurate. The grand cultural hall of the Alliance headquarters had been transformed into a showcase of member worlds, with representatives displaying aspects of their civilizations through art, music, cuisine, and technology. The Earth section, previously one of the least visited areas in previous summits, now found itself the center of unprecedented interest. Delegates who had previously avoided or ignored the human representatives now approached with careful respect. More telling were the subtle changes in how Riel was perceived, no longer viewed as a mere curiosity or pet, but addressed directly by many delegates as a recognized diplomatic entity. Ambassador Wright, the imposing draconian representative, approached again, this time accompanied by several members of his delegation. We have been discussing your companion's demonstration this morning. A regrettable necessity, Eleanor replied diplomatically. We would have preferred a less confrontational introduction to Riel's capabilities. Regrettable but illuminating, the Draconian rumbled. Our historical archives contain references to Earth's companion species, but the practical applications were unclear until today. One of the junior Draconians stepped forward, addressing Riel directly. Is it true that your species can interface with most standardized system architectures? Diplomatic companion. Before Eleanor could intervene, Riel's translator module activated, producing perfectly formed speech in the common galactic language. Our capabilities are tailored to specific diplomatic functions, as required by treaty obligations. The response, carefully measured to neither confirm nor deny specific technical capabilities, caused a ripple of surprise among the Draconian delegation. While Riel's translator had been activated during previous summits, he had rarely been directly addressed by non-human delegates, and his responses had been kept minimal. Fascinating, the senior Draconian observed. We would be interested in discussing potential cooperative ventures involving your companion program. Ambassador, the applications for cross-species communication in our outer colony developments could be significant. Earth would welcome such discussions, Eleanor replied smoothly, noting with satisfaction how quickly perceptions were shifting. What had been dismissed as a primitive human eccentricity was rapidly being re-evaluated as a valuable diplomatic and technological asset. As the evening progressed, Eleanor observed with professional satisfaction how the dynamics of alliance politics were subtly realigning around them. Delegates who had previously aligned with the traditionalist bloc were now making overtures toward the Earth representatives. Species that had maintained cautious neutrality were openly seeking introductions. Most telling was the complete absence of the Vularian delegation from the reception, a clear acknowledgement of their diplomatic setback. By morning, rumors were circulating that Sub-Ambassador Tri had been recalled to Vularia. His promising diplomatic career effectively ended by the miscalculation of challenging Earth's diplomatic companion. Quite the performance, Delegate Luminara commented, approaching as the reception began to wind down. Your standing in the Alliance has advanced more in one day than in the previous 5 years of careful positioning. Sometimes opportunity emerges from unexpected quarters, Eleanor replied, though I would have preferred a less confrontational path. Luminara's bioluminescent patterns shifted to indicate knowing amusement. Would you really, Ambassador? The demonstration has certainly proven effective. Eleanor allowed herself a small smile. Perhaps not. Diplomacy occasionally requires clarification of capabilities. Indeed. Luminara's patterns shifted to a more serious configuration. You should know that recordings of this morning's incident have already spread throughout Alliance diplomatic circles. The image of your companion calmly interfacing with Alliance systems, while the Vularian delegation struggled for breath, has made quite an impression. An unfortunate but proportional response to unprovoked aggression, Eleanor stated formally, though she couldn't entirely suppress her satisfaction. Of course, Luminara agreed, her patterns now indicating something close to admiration. Though I suspect many will be reviewing their assessment of Earth's potential contributions to the Alliance with renewed interest. As the reception concluded, and they returned to their quarters, Eleanor found herself reflecting on the day's unexpected developments. What had begun as a deliberate provocation had transformed into a pivotal moment in humanity's integration into galactic society. We should prepare for tomorrow's session, she told Riel, as they entered the secure suite. If the High Patriarch is correct, we'll be formally invited to join the Varaxian mediation team, a significant advancement in our standing. Riel moved to the communication console and interfaced briefly. The Vularians will not accept this development without further response. Eleanor nodded thoughtfully. You're right. Of course. This isn't over. It's merely shifting to more subtle battlegrounds. The traditionalist bloc won't abandon decades of opposition based on a single incident. She moved to the suite's window, looking out at the spectacular vista of the Alliance headquarters, a massive orbital structure that housed representatives from hundreds of worlds, the culmination of millennia of interspecies cooperation and conflict. But we've changed the narrative, she continued. We're no longer just the primitive newcomers with our quaint animal companions. Now, we're the species with unexpected capabilities and approaches, an unknown factor in the diplomatic equation. Riel joined her at the window, his intelligent gaze following hers across the sprawling complex of the Alliance headquarters. After a moment, he returned to the console. They kicked the human's dog. The human didn't need to retaliate. The dog did. Eleanor laughed softly at the succinct summary of the day's events. Precisely. And now they'll be wondering what other capabilities we've kept understated. She knelt beside her longtime companion, running her fingers through the fur behind his ears, a gesture of affection rarely displayed in public diplomatic settings. The oldest partnership in human history, she murmured. From hunting mammoths to navigating galactic politics, who would have thought our bond would become our most valuable diplomatic asset? Riel leaned into her touch, his eyes conveying an intelligence and understanding that transcended the genetic enhancements and specialized training. The partnership between their species had begun around ancient fires on the African plains, evolving through millennia of shared history, long before humanity reached for the stars. Now, that ancient bond was writing a new chapter in the grand narrative of galactic diplomacy, a reminder that sometimes the oldest relationships offer the most innovative solutions to the challenges of an expanding universe. As reports of the incident spread throughout Alliance space over the following days, a new phrase entered the diplomatic lexicon of 100 worlds: Earth's diplomatic dogs. What had begun as a dismissive term used by traditionalist factions was rapidly transforming into an expression that carried notes of cautious respect, and in some circles, trepidation. For Eleanor and Riel, it was merely the beginning of a new phase in humanity's integration into the greater galactic community, a community that was now reassessing its assumptions about Earth and its unique approach to interspecies cooperation. The message was clear throughout the Alliance: underestimate humans and their companion species at your peril. Behind their diplomatic smiles and wagging tails lay capabilities that were only beginning to be understood, and the patience to wait for exactly the right moment to reveal them.